right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move around. Again, we're going to have, after this next presentation, we're going to have a 10-minute break. So I want to bring up who are already up on stage, but I'd like to bring up to the stage. No, that's by all means. Joanna Palmer, who was formerly of Baker University and now South University, and Kelly Clark of Baker University. And they're going to teach us about, or they're going to tell us a little bit about the next color of Pepsi. Is that right? The next color of Pepsi. Oh, I'm sorry, Diet Coke. I apologize.
All right, is this working? Yeah. Okay, perfect. I need the one where I can walk back and forth. I'm one of those. I just keep thinking, man, Kelly and I keep looking like, oh, this has been such a great day, right? So far. And we hope that it can continue. And we hope that we can engage you in some conversation. So a few disclaimers. Kelly and I are still in the learning mode, right? But we thought we're going to take the risk and jump out here and do something and start to engage all of you. Working on this project with Kelly, I've learned a lot. I've also learned how important it is for us to help our faculty become learners, because as they learn, they then can take that and integrate that into how they understand students learning, right? And so those are some of the kind of the side benefits of working on this project with Kelly. We also wanted to add the disclaimer that we are not following any best practices regarding presentation slides. But we knew that the slides were going to go to the website, were going to go to you later. So these slides are designed so that they can operate on their own without us, right? So they are very text heavy. There are not a lot of images, but that was done intentionally. So we're going to pivot a little bit, and we thought we would do a presentation on usage. I think this can also be a conversation with how you all are using it or how this might relate to the work that you're doing. But we're going to focus on how can we leverage generative AI working with faculty and SMEs to create curriculum and courses. That's the focus, but I think there's a lot of other lessons we can kind of pull out of this because, again, there's so side benefits as we start to introduce generative AI to faculty who maybe still have their head in the sand and they get to play with it, practice, use it. All right, so we didn't do the clicker. We didn't decide who was doing the clicker. All right, that's good. Yep. So the primary objective when we started creating this was to increase knowledge and ability to leverage these tools as we're working with our instructional design teams and our SMEs to create courses. Again, though, I think the side benefit is we get that benefit of having the faculty work with these tools, and then it becomes a little bit more ingrained in them as to what they can and cannot do. Some of the things that were mentioned today, we're going to see today. You're going to see some of the ceilings you can hit based on the prompts that you get, which is why I think when we're thinking about AI, we heard, the alien reference that Sean did in the morning. We hear humans versus AI. I'm an and person, right? So it's the humans and AI. And I think we'll hopefully get that theme today, that it's instructional designers and AI. SMEs and AI, AI and SMEs, right? That it's all integrating. You can put input in, you can review the output, you can have it generate the content. The humans can generate the content and have it give it feedback, right? So there's a lot of loops that we're going to talk about, but I think the theme of making sure it's not or, that we're going to do this or that, but it's and is a better word to put in there. All right, next slide. I guess I could do the clicker myself, but I feel like very powerful if I do it this way. Maybe. I think the next slide is, we just wanted to get a show of hands from you. So how many of you all have used generative AI tools yourself? Okay. How many of you are using generative AI tools at least monthly? What about weekly? So it's going up. What about daily? Anyone? So some people. So with a hand, it's a lot, and we could see that it starts to pair off. How many of you are instructional design or instructional design adjacent? I would say working with faculty to create lesson plans, those sort of things. Are you leveraging generative AI in that work? Starting to, yes. just getting to know the audience a little bit. So we are going to ask you to answer just I think we have two at the beginning, 2 questions to begin with. So if you want to scan the QR code, or you can enter the code, and we'll give a couple minutes. Waiting for presenter.
It is present.
You have to press escape to go out to it. So while we're doing that, for those of you that are instructional design or instructional design adjacent, working with faculty, maybe on, in any sort of Center for Teaching Excellence, Center for Teaching and Learning, working with faculty on teaching strategy, how have you started to use generative AI in the work you do? So for those of you that are instructional design, or maybe you work in a Center for Teaching Excellence, working with faculty on teaching strategies and in-class type work, how are you starting to use and leverage generative AI within that work?
Asking instructors to who are reluctant to challenge the students to use AI to critically think. So whatever the AI helps do, then use that as a starting point to get them.
Okay, so starting to have the conversations with faculty, asking them to integrate AI within the students' work that they're doing, right? And then also, then come the conversations we heard earlier, then how do we assess that and those sort of things. What else? Can we get one more example, and then we'll return to the survey, because I hate to just like stall and have one person talk. So how else are people leveraging the tools?
Built in for AI generated content. And so our instructional designers work with our SMEs which are our faculty. I think they're using it mainly as a sort of a starting place, something to react to with the work that we do within our templates and things like that.
Awesome. Can I get your contact information before you leave today? Awesome. All right. Okay. So look, yay, we have success. We have results happening here. So scale of 0 to 3, how comfortable are we leveraging Gen AI to assist with course development? So we have a few people, not at all. A lot of people just getting started. Pretty close though to, I was maybe a couple more. It's like a race. Comfortable, but still learning. And 6 proficient. Who does, I'm going to call you out now. Who put proficient? I would like your contact information as well before you leave today. I feel like I'm in between yellow and purple. Like I'm straddling it right now. I feel like I'm getting there. My comfort level goes up, and I'm learning more about it every day. All right. We will go back to, I know I had to log into ChatGPT. I got to remember to log out, or Sean's going to make a big mess in there if I don't. Here, do you want me to do the clicker? I'm going backwards. Sorry. Got to get my bearings. So we've already done the introduction. We're going to talk about some use cases specifically to instructional design. So I really appreciate the examples because they were more from the teaching place. I think the piece where AI is integrated into Blackboard and we're using it in the design process, that's really the perspective that Kelly and I took for this presentation. We have a lot of slides with examples of inputs and outputs and how we had to kind of nurture those to get to something a little bit more usable. And then we will share at least some lessons we've learned thus far, and we would really be excited for you to add to that, similar to what Louisa said this morning. We're here to grow these, and so we can integrate some more information into the slides before we have them uploaded to the website for you all. So I was trying to think about how do we describe this relationship between generative AI and humans. And so this is an iceberg, which is often used as a metaphor for many things. And so if we think about an iceberg in the water, what we can see above, the teeny tiny piece, and it's kind of sometimes the pretty piece, right? It's what we can see. That's the visible output. That is what above the water line. So when you put your prompt in, what you get out is the visible output. It's the top of the iceberg. Under the iceberg is all of the stuff we heard in the previous presentation, really, right? We don't know how it's working. This is the black box part, right? You can't see it. You have an idea that it's big, but you don't know how big. You don't know what it looks like and how much power and data underneath to produce the little bit that we can see at the top. And then the water around the iceberg is kind of our environment. That's what we're doing. We can see it, we can go around it, we can explore it. But very few of us are ever going to be able to explore the part that's down here, right? You're driving your boat around the iceberg. You got to have a little trust that you're navigating around it okay, and that you're going to be safe on the journey, unless you're the Titanic. So what do we think? Do we think this encapsulates kind of the idea of how generative AI? So I'm going to disclose in full transparency, as we're learning to do today, this slide pre-existed in a slide deck I downloaded. So I asked ChatGPT, how can I use an iceberg as a metaphor for the interaction between humans and generative AI? And it gave me a lot more than this. I had to filter down. It likes to give a lot of ideas sometimes. So when I asked, what can the water represent? It gave me like 5 things the water could represent. So there was a lot of interaction between me and the tool to get it distilled down to this but I felt like it worked. So I talked a little bit about this. Where does Gen AI fit in the process, right? So AI really is part of the process, but it can go many different directions, right? So this graphic is an attempt to show I, as an instructional designer, can put content into AI. I can get content out of AI. I can work with the SME. The SME can work with the AI, and you can go in loops. And so I think it'll become apparent when we start doing examples. But if I'm an instructional designer, I can choose to work with the SME first to generate some outcomes, or I can go to AI to draft some outcomes to take to the SME. I can teach the SME how to draft outcomes and get some feedback from AI, right? Same with creating assessments or creating lesson plans. The AI can be the drafter, or the SME can be the drafter, or the instructional designer can be the drafter. And then you can leverage the loop to get feedback, refine, build out additional examples, those sort of things. Some basic use cases, and I think this is for instructional design, but this is really just a lot of things that it can do. Brainstorming, it can help with alignment. Course lesson and outlining, content drafting and creation, assessments and assignments, and rubrics and feedback it can help with. And so Kelly's going to show us some rubric things that she did in the tool. I had an interesting case from a faculty member who was using it to help with the tone of their feedback. So it can help with tone. We had, she said, she kept getting feedback from students. They thought she was mean. The instructors that are so direct, students infer that as they're mean. And so she started to feed some of her feedback, which was very direct, into these tools to ask it to soften the tone, to provide an encouraging tone to help somebody improve. And she noticed a difference. She was getting less resistance to her feedback from the students, right? So again, helping this faculty see how they can use this tool, to me, is a sneaky way to get them to understand the tool a little better So then when you start the conversations of why we're going to let students use it, they have a little bit more foundation. All right, so then I'm going to turn it over to you, Kelly.
Okay, so before I get started, I want to first apologize. You're probably very sleepy. Those sandwiches and cookies are settling in. So if we have to, we'll ask Sean to come up and do some improv, okay, and wake us all up. But I do have to continue or Joanna will get mad at me. So I'm not here to, I am an instructional designer by trade, and I'm not here to teach you about the instructional design, everything, but these are our stages. So we use at Baker College, understanding by design. And there are 3 stages. And the first stage is when we identify our desired results. So we talk about our goals, which lead into our course description. The course description we get from there, or our big ideas. From our big ideas, we get our course description. From there, we get our outcomes. And then we go even deeper than just our student learning outcomes. We call them enabling objectives. That's the entire first stage. The second stage is we determine the acceptable evidence. So what are our formative assessments? And then the third stage are the learning experiences. So the readings, the videos, the quizzes, the summative assessments. And this pretty much tells you what I just said, right? So we brainstorm the goals, we generate outcomes, we get objectives, and Gen AI can assist with all of that. All right, I'm going to start with all of the slides that I put together that do not follow any of the good rules, right? So there is a lot of information. I'm not going to read it all to you. I don't expect that you probably read it all, but after hours of playing and days and weeks, I would start with a one-liner prompt, wouldn't get what I wanted, right? Worked some more, and I learned through repetition and learning myself and what I was getting for output that I needed to put better input prompts. So I started with a persona. I want Gen AI to be an expert instructional designer. I want them to use understanding by design as their model. And I want them to create a first year college level. I was very specific. And as you can see, I gave them 3 different things I was expecting. I wanted 4 big ideas and essential questions. I wanted a concise 1-paragraph course description. And then I also wanted student learning outcomes based on the big ideas that Gen AI created. And I also told them, don't use understand because it's not a measurable verb. It likes to use the word and understand. I got that several times, right? And I also, I don't know if I did here, but I did in some of my other, I wanted to use 1 verb. We at Baker College only use 1 verb for our outcomes. So that took me some time. And I also told it, what level of the blooms I wanted it to use. So very, very specific. Back and forth with this model. When I first started, I also had another 4th prompt. Every time I put it in, because I wanted Gen AI to also create enabling objectives based on the student learning outcomes that they came up with. I wasn't getting what I wanted. So on my next slide, well, you'll see the course description, first of all, that it came up with. I thought was really pretty good after time, and the student learning outcomes. And this is based on a first-year college level comp and critical thinking course. Pretty descriptive. The student learning outcomes came up with 1 verb. Didn't use understand. So what I did is I separated my 4th prompt and I asked Gen AI to take the student learning outcomes it created and then create 3 to 4 enabling objectives for each of the outcomes. I thought they were actually pretty good. Again, didn't use understand in one verb. If I left those two things out, I always had multiple verbs and understand throughout. So very specific. So after time, this is what I learned. I learned to play a persona, right? I asked the AI model to play a persona, very specific and set parameters. I had exclusions. I chunked my requests, and then I was clarifying after I asked a couple times, I asked them to clarify some of their responses for me. And then I would refer back to the answers that the model provided for additional information.
Hand off. All right. So as Kelly was talking, I was thinking about how many people have done that type of work. Either you're a faculty member and you're doing that work, or you work with a SME to do that work. How long does it sometimes take just to explain like Bloom's taxonomy and why we use verbs, right? So I don't know about your institution, but all of the institutions I've worked at, instructional design and working with faculty to support curriculum, it's usually a department like the size of a pea. But it is the department that touches every single student in the organization, because we have this little pea-sized department that helps faculty teach better, which is what we do, we teach, and deliver good curriculum, right? So we have, again, this pea-sized instructional design team. It's the department that touches everything, but it is usually the department that is the smallest, right? So as we were talking, we're like, how do we help that? How do we use this to help those teams leverage all the knowledge, right? So you can start to see that if it starts to put out output that's not accurate, that's still where the instructional designer, with all of that knowledge of backwards design and how to lay out curriculum, can help inform it to do better, or you just use it as a draft. But imagine if you could sit with your SME, get some ideas, get some information, leverage this tool for efficiency and productivity to then get you a really good draft to beat up together. And again, so creating that feedback loop, because those outcomes were good, but maybe it's not quite right. They're like, no, we do that in comp 2, right? The tool's not going to know that. So you can start to then drill down, refine, those sort of things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about stage 2, which is the determine acceptable evidence. Actually, we're both going to talk about it. I'm going to talk a little bit from the assessment standpoint. Once we have our outcomes, how do we start to create assessments? We have learned today that because of AI, reimagining assessments is critical right now. And at our school, we're sitting, how do we do it all at one time? It's almost as big. At Baker, we shifted from Blackboard to Canvas, and it was a huge project. We have to touch every course to do that. And now this is, again, how do we touch courses efficiently and effectively so that they are able to assess student learning now that we have AI in the picture? And so again, I think we can leverage the tool itself, the tool that's causing the disruption, to help us get there. So again, similar things, brainstorming, you'll see, creating drafts, and assisting with feedback, content, and tone. Creating rubric language. If we remember, if you ask Gen AI, if you ask ChatGPT, which is what we chose to use for this, if you ask it what it was created for, it's a creator, right? Too, it is designed to help create. Like you see, we heard, was it the visual, there's a lot of visual AI and that sort of thing, and words, right? So these are very creative expressions, and it's used to create. It will actually hallucinate, in part because it's trying to answer your question. Every once in a while, it's kind of been programmed to or it's programs is not the right word. I'm not an IT person, but it will say, I can't do that. Like if you ask ChatGPT to find you scholarly resources, it will tell you it can't. But a lot of times, depending on how you ask the question, it will answer you because it's told to answer you. And that's why when you ask it the same question multiple times, it's also generating some different things. But sometimes the hallucinations are, it will just keep going. You can ask it for more and more and more, and it will give you more and more and more. But it's a great tool to help brainstorm. I see it as a catalyst with folks too. So you can put it in. It may not be what the SME wants, but it's going to generate the SME to start thinking about what they do want, right? As they start ruling out what isn't working or why that output isn't good. Right. So similar to Kelly, my experience as I was looking at assessments, I started trying to refine them, right? I started with some basic things, and if I put in a basic prompt, it gives me something, I don't want to say basic, it gives you a lot, but it's very broad, right? Because it's just trying to take a guess at what you want. It does perform better the more guidance you give it. So similar to Kelly, I started to build out, and again, I'm still learning. This is not an excellent prompt. This is a mediocre prompt that produced something I could work with, right? But I put Bloom's taxonomy in there. I told it the types of things that I wanted it to come out with. And so it does start to pull out things, and I didn't pull out everything, but some examples. Again, using this as a jumping off point with your faculty and SME. Another thing I often ran into when I was working with faculty more was they wanted case studies. It's really hard sometimes to find like the perfect case study, or we want a variety of case studies. They can take an extensive amount of time to create case studies for students to work with, unless you find like the exact right publisher, but then those are out there and they've been used 1,000 times. So I had no idea what it would do. But I thought let's see if it will start to help me do a case study. Again, this is mediocre. I think I could do better with some time. But I, again, gave it a persona or a perspective to approach this from, and I actually gave it two. I wanted it to leverage instructional design and human resource management to give it a foundation and create a fictitious company. So I think what I would do to build this out more is I would use the conversational feature of these tools to get more detail into that case study until it was where I needed it to. But from a first pass, it gave me something that I could work with. And this is more of the output. It just from that one prompt, it identified the key stakeholders, the duration, the impact of the problem. And so then I did take that, feed it back in, and say, okay, if I want to use this case study, now how do I create the assignment for the students, right? So I'm a faculty member. I have a case study that I've created, and I gave it the entire output. It had just, had it referred it back to the entire output it just gave me. And so it actually wrote an interesting format for the directions because I did not give any sort of parameters or contingencies around that too much, but it did go through and identify all of the steps itself. It figured out what those would be and then gave some formatting and submission guidelines. So again, to me, this is a great draft that I could potentially work with as a starting point. The other thing I could do, and I played with this with a different course, if I wanted it to create 10 case studies that would allow students to demonstrate the same mastery of the same outcomes, but using different cases, it can do that too. I did it with a criminal justice course, and it's just amazing sometimes to see what it starts to generate. Again, they're drafts. You're going to want to massage them, finalize them, but amazing at the content it can give you to start with, to get your gears going, to get you where you're going.
You ever created a case study? I mean, how long do they take? Hours, right? I mean, she got 10 in what, 2 minutes?
Right. We were like, oh my God, that would have taken like 3 weeks.
Or 3 weeks? Long time. Okay, is this me? Guess me. All right, so I'm going to finish off stage 2. So I did the rubric example, and I took a business course. And again, specific, I wanted 4 performance levels and based on the assignment directions. Now I worked with, one of our instructional designers worked with our subject matter experts, came up with all of the assignment directions, which is pretty lengthy, couple pages. along with how many references, APA style. I put all of that in. I thought it was very specific and it came up in a matter of minutes. This is hard work if you're an instructional designer. Do you like to create rubrics back there? It's hard. It can be difficult. So within a matter of, I don't know, 20 seconds, I had a 4-page rubric with all the criteria that I was looking for. So difficult work. Again, great way to start, and then massage it from there. Work with the subject matter expert. They're the ones grading the material, not me. So I want to make sure that they're able to use the tool in order to, successfully grade each of their students. So how long do you think that would take? Back there, your designers, how long? Couple hours? Yeah, take some time. So obviously, the more information you provide, the better information and more accurate you're going to get. Refining our prompts through the conversation and adding and removing additional details was helpful. And then prompt chaining. Has everybody heard of prompt chaining? Yes, have you used? So I use that quite a bit. So I was able to use that feature in order to get a better outcome. So I would take part of it, use the answer, right, in my next prompt to get another answer. So just creating a sequence of prompts that led to my final draft.
All right. That's me.
So Joanna does all the talking. She likes to talk much better than I do. So I'm going to give her the microphone again.
I was going to say that wasn't true, but it kind of is. Prompt chaining was something I had to learn. I had no idea. I don't even know. I think I was using a little bit of like the iterative conversation part of ChatGPT. I was used to that, like just kind of just chatting with it to get some more information. But the idea of the prompt chaining where it's retaining that information within that chat thread. So you can just refer back to its last response. Like I kept trying to cut and paste it all down, but I didn't have to, right? And so learning how it works through this process, which is what made me think this is kind of the secret side benefit of leveraging this tool with the work that faculty do. Because I now understand it better. I now understand why students are using it and how they're using it in a beneficial way to learn, because I've experienced that myself. So the last stage is planning the learning experiences that go around with this. And a lot of this is parallel to what we've talked about before, but helping faculty create lesson plans, provide variety in their lesson plans. You can go back and help. A lot of times instructors create their instruction and we talk to them about, you have to adapt, you have to be flexible, you have to meet students where they're at. And sometimes that's not their strength. They just aren't sure quite how to do that yet, especially when we're working with adjuncts who are practitioners coming into the field. So again, they can use this. I love the term Sean used before. It's like a sloppy assistant. And I would say the same here. It's like an intern. You need to give it, which was I think what Kelly was sharing with me the other day. You have to give it a lot of information and sometimes it's not quite right, but you're guiding it along the way. I started to use it because my passion area is in that online space. How could I use this to help faculty be more confident in their teaching online? So we can use it that way as well. So again, we won't go into these at great length, but I took the assignment it gave me for the developmental psychology prompt I had earlier and said, okay, well, if this is my assessment, what do I do in the class to give the students some opportunity to practice? How can I create some really engaging formative assessment opportunities that directly relate to this assessment, which I know is measuring my outcomes, right? So we're using that backwards design. And so it starts to give me some. So it gave me all things that were a little bit more aligned to face-to-face instruction, right? Because I didn't put anything in my prompt about that. And so then I said, well, could you revise the items you created to work for a fully online asynchronous learning environment? And it's always so nice. It's like, why, certainly. So it did. So you'll see back here, create a timeline, right? We might be doing that with Post-it notes on a wall. It's going to help me as an instructor who's never taught online. Oh, wait, there's interactive timeline web tools I can use online to do that same thing that I love to do with my in-person students, right? So I thought it was a great thing for even things like that, how to help them take the ideas that they have that are percolating and get them to level up a little bit. Same with discussion. Sometimes faculty are fantastic at creating in-person discussion activities. And they're really leveraging the back and forth and doing the discussion, but they have a harder time doing that same sort of discussion in an asynchronous space. So I have like 10, you could ask for 100, and it will give you at least, again, that catalyst for the ideas, something that might connect. Oh, I could do that, but I could tie it to a case example from real life that I had at work a month ago. Again, that catalyst helping them out. This one is, I was trying to think of all the different kind of modalities. So thinking of a live synchronous class that we're doing over Zoom, right? We often have to help faculty make that translation between this and doing it on the screens. So what can I do in that type of format? Again, you could give it some parameters. What sort of outcomes are you trying to achieve? What level do you want to be having the students work at? This was just on lesson planning. I've seen, faculty who do their hour-long lecture and people are sitting there and they're falling asleep, right? So again, helping them, how do I chunk all of this content? How do I take 3 chapters of the book and put it into themes so that I'm not just teaching in the same order as what I am trying to present? I think that kind of relates to the rubric example that Kelly gave. You saw all those directions with all those bullet points. You know what the faculty's natural inclination is to create a rubric row for every bullet in the directions. And so when I looked at it, I was like, a SME would have created a 25-line rubric and then wondered why it took them an hour and a half to grade the assignment. ChatGPT read all of the directions and chunked them into content mastery, synthesis. It did it all by itself. That it was not, I went back and it's not in the same order as the directions. And that is something that the SME likely would not have done, right? So it actually would get them to think about assessment a little bit differently. Similar to the other prompts, I think really, depending on your level of comfort with it, really looking at the conversational tool with it. I think the nice thing about ChatGPT with chat in the name, the way the interface is set up, is it's very much like it's messaging. That to people is familiar. And so when they realize that it can be a conversation, that they're using the tool and they can go back and forth with the tool, can be more powerful. I see a lot of people who put a prompt and then they start a new chat and they do another prompt. I was talking with someone yesterday and I was showing him something on my screen in ChatGPT. He goes, "Oh, I forget you can have a conversation with it," right? And so he was thinking that would be way more helpful. And so remembering that piece, and as you're introducing folks to it, that it is a conversation, it's a conversation you can guide and lead, right? To refine and get more input. Again, providing as much detail, contingencies on what to include and exclude. Personas. So again, just some examples for those that might want this later. So I want to pause there a little bit because I think we could probably talk a little bit instead of doing an example, because there's only a few people that are instructional designers. So we're going to do something a little bit different here. And I was thinking about something I heard the other day. Somebody brilliant was speaking earlier, and it made me think of another webinar I had gone to related to AI. And they were talking about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. So how many are familiar with that? That's the pop quiz, right? Okay, so does somebody want to take a stab at it to summarize what it is? Down here because it's sweaty.
The idea is that peer learning is a catalyst for individuals, and within a group of slightly more capable peers, each learner is better than they would be alone.
That was much more eloquent than what I would have said, but yes. But what this person was proposing was, while they might not be a slightly better learner, though in the case of the rubric, they were able to group those things more naturally than a SME would. So what he was saying was to almost thinking of generative AI or some of these tools that can be sloppy assistants, is it's creating a little bit of a peer, I don't want to say peer because they're not our friend, but there's a group dynamic there. There's an interaction there, right? So when you think of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, it's saying that somebody by themselves, whether it's a child, a learner, me as an employee in a workplace, if I have to sit in a room by myself and create a proposal, my potential is here. My ability by myself to craft that is here without any additional tools. But if I'm sitting at a table with Kelly and Amy and Laura in a room and we're crafting a proposal, it goes up here, right? It's underlies group work at work, peer-to-peer learning and group learning in school. It's actually also kind of helps why we want that interaction between students, right? To me, this is adding something else to the mix, right? So when we think about faculty learning and what they're able to do, how they're able to apply best practices regarding curriculum or teaching, or whether we're thinking about the student's potential to learn, if we harness these tools correctly, it's helping increase that likelihood that that student's going to be in that ZPD a little bit. And I just thought that was really interesting because as people were talking today, I kept thinking back to that comment, right? So it was just his opinion of what he thought, but he was really just trying to connect learning theory and how we can embrace this within learning theory if we harness it correctly. And so just sharing that tidbit, I guess. And so I think we're going to close out, but we would love to have some questions from you. I think Kelly's going to bring us home presentation wise. We really wanted to create this presentation so that you could take it back to your institutions if you thought it would be helpful with your faculty, with your SPEs. So that will be coming soon.
Okay, so we've had several best practices and tips. And so we summarized our best practices and tips for you. So obviously we found out that we need to be more specific and detailed with our prompts. We need that back and forth type conversation. So to test, tweak, and then redeploy. And then refine our output. That prompt chaining, so using the output from one prompt as part of the input from the next to the next prompt. I use that quite a bit, just to cut down on giving it too much at one time. I found it was overload for them, for whatever it is. I don't know, the tool. And then don't be afraid to experiment. And that's what I think both Joanna and I found out just after hours or days or weeks testing this and learning. We learn from one another. We've talked quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, more than we've talked in a long time, which has been great. And it's because we were both learning this tool in order really to, so one, I needed to work better with my SMEs and more efficiently. And I'm finding that, I know in the last couple of weeks, I've been meeting with a group for months. We're working on a bachelor's program from scratch. So probably 3 months we've met every week for an hour and a half to go through each course, brainstorm from the beginning, all of our 3 stages. We're now on the second. So we've done all of fall of 25. We're working on spring of 25. But in an hour and a half meeting, we might get to our student learning outcomes and then possibly to our enabling objectives. So we've just now paid 3 SMEs plus a couple instructional designers. And if I'm the only one there, at least you're paying me. And so anybody who's an administrator here and gets to see those bills, you would love to probably ask, your designers to, hey, why don't you see if you could work this tool in your meetings with your SMEs to see if it will go any quicker. We're not taking any, I mean, they're the experts, our subject matter experts. They know what they want. They know how much they can teach in an 8 or 16-week course. And so I have to rely on them. I can guide them through the process. I can look at alignment, which I look at very closely. And I can give my advice, right? But that's all I can do. These last couple of weeks, I've used this when we were brainstorming. After we had our student learning outcomes, we started with assessments. We had some pretty good layout and they wanted some case studies. I know Joanna just talked about that, but we were struggling a little bit and we were also struggling on a project, parts of a project. So while they were talking, I was in the background using ChatGPT and came up with quite a good layout. I copied and pasted it and said, hey, I want you to go through this. Some might work, some parts might not, but that's okay. We have a start. This brainstorming would have taken us another hour times however much we pay them per hour times 3. So take a look at that, rip it apart, use what you can, go back into the tool and take what you've used, put it in the prompt as a prompt and see if, if we can get a better assessment. So that's how we've been using it at Baker College. We're obviously putting it into practice. We're starting to use it more and more, and hopefully we'll get, honestly, it comes up with so much information that it's giving us more directions for our students than some of our SMEs will give me. So obviously don't be afraid. I said already, ask the tool to make your prompt better before you ask to complete the task. So use numbers or spacing. I did find that using numbers to separate 1, 2, 3, and then I had to separate 4, which I already talked about. Joanna and I both use quotation marks. I don't know if that helped, but it gave me what I needed. So, and then we treat it like a new intern. It's impossible to give the tool too much information. Yeah, we've already talked a lot about this. I just did. So it's increased our collaboration. It's reducing the burdens on our SMEs, and they have so much time and effort that they have to put into curriculum development. It's reduced some of my burden. 1 minute, really? Okay.
She got a 10.
It helps us create more personalized and inclusive curriculum. And then of course it saves time and money, which I just talked about. Are you going to come up here and start joking around? Yeah, I know. All right. We have a list of resources and.
Oh, do you have to deploy them?
No.
Oh, so she told me I could talk somewhere. All right, so I guess we haven't been able to make it quite as interactive because we jam-packed everything too much into it, right? I think that's always my burden. I want to give all the information. But what are you thinking if we kind of loop back to the beginning? Any ideas on how you might use the tool to help get your faculty to start using the tool? Anyone have kind of any ideas on how they would do that?
I just did
Lord.
I just did a rubric for a final project and I exactly did what Kelly was saying. And it really helped. At least it got me started and then I figured out what made sense and what didn't. So it helped me down. I like days what I thought I would need to do. So literally 30 minutes.
Right. Save time. I was scared to do a rubric. That's why Kelly did that part. What else? Anyone else have other examples of how they're helping their faculty leverage the tool? So different from before, where we kind of are just the broad question in the beginning was kind of how faculty can get students to use the tool. Anyone have any examples from their experience on how faculty are using the tool? We must go back and ask them then. You can, she's coming. Okay, yeah.
How using these resources to generate content for their classes to generate these materials. So at my college, we pay faculty to develop curriculum. We pay them to develop online classes. It's a set amount we pay them. It's a contractually negotiated payment. And I'm just thinking about, for a long time anyway, a lot of that was generated by the faculty member.
Mhm.
And now what will be the balance between them generate, just like with students, right?
Yep.
What are they generating? What are the parameters for using these types of resources? Where do we see that balance? How does that get negotiated in a contract? All those things. I'm just wondering if anybody's managed that yet and has any.
I'm going to venture to say
tips?
probably not, but that is an excellent question. It brings it full circle to these gentlemen's conversation over here related to ethics earlier, right? And some of the things related to that, right? Just the way students are using it. But yes, I mean, I know at Baker, the contracts are given like, oh, it's at this level. We think it's going to be this many hours, right? So what is this doing to that work, right? I think those questions are probably going to have to be answered. They're going to have to be answered by the institution. And I think they should be answered after we become comfortable with the tool and see what we can and use it for first, because I think it has a lot of opportunity. And then how do we kind of create the safety structures around it, but also just the ethical and professional responsibility pieces. Jeremy, or, I think Jeremy was the one that mentioned, like the transparency piece, right? That we have to instill a culture related to it. Goes back to the idea of creating whatever it is, a policy, a philosophy, a value statement regarding how us as an institution and our members interact with this technology. And so I think if we are fostering that culture of transparency, then that gives us at least the starting point to have the conversation and make that decision regarding how do we build that in. If we're say we're paying you for 10 hours and it took you 2 because ChatGPT wrote your course for you. Right.
Think about another use of AI. I've seen where there's some products or companies that are driven by academics who created these products where they would evaluate the participation or discussion contributions of students, right? Whether it's like a breakout room and they record it and then they assess the participation, of course. And then we're also seeing it with teams integrating AI. So if you have a meeting, they will track how many minutes Christine spoke and John spoke, and even do kind of sentiment and everything of that sort. So I'm just wondering about, this is curriculum development, so it's not quite related, but this application in the classroom of using AI to either evaluate and or provide feedback to students. Yeah.
Valid, right? I like it from a more brainstorming and helping to be a catalyst for creation of content tool. I'm very skeptical about the assessment piece for a couple of reasons. One, if you go look at Turnitin right now, it's going to tell you it has fantastic grades, copy leaks, all of these different things. But as we know, research comes out every day and instances come out every day, right? That it's very likely that these tools, based on whenever they did their study, how they did their study, they're very inflated levels of confidence, right? Because we see a lot more false positives than some of those institutions or organizations. It feels a little wonky to me, right? There's too many false positives still. Same for assessment. So I have the honor of a colleague at South University, Dr. Luan Fuller, and you can tell him I mentioned his name. Okay. He actually has a research article coming out, hopefully April or May. It's in peer review right now, and it's about assessment. So they did an entire study where they fed content in and had all of, Bard and Gemini and ChatGPT. They gave it the assignment, they gave it the rubric, and kind of how do these things assess? And it gave the ranges on one of the assignments was literally fed it in 5 times. One time it gave it a 57, one time it gave it a 74, one time it gave it a 92, right? Because of the way it works, right? It's the same reason why you can put the same prompt in and it will give you different responses. So I don't think at least as they are, the commercial versions that are free and open are not intended for that. I would be skeptical myself to know more about the black box behind some of these companies that are saying we can evaluate online participation and engagement and discussion for you in a meaningful way. I know I went to the Instructure conference last summer, and there's a ton of tools out there saying, oh, we can embed this. And we're like we've talked about, it's just sneaking in through all these other platforms. But I think that we do need to make sure that we are asking the right questions and know what questions to ask about. How is that working? How do you know it's working? Because, we've all done the vendor pitch, so it sounds really good, but I think we need to ask a lot of questions. Oh, I feel like I have to do this.
This is in response to how are you seeing interesting examples? In a couple of the things that you saw, the ability for the Gen AI to rapidly come up with sample work. If you frame that as a way to do practice or to do different varieties of practice as opposed to ways to skip practice, that could be really useful. And there are a couple of I've heard of from our college. One is in the languages where they use it to generate, they give it a very specific persona-driven prompt. Like, I want you to play the role of a shopkeeper in a butcher shop in Seville in Spain. And then in a Spanish class, you have to go into the shop and order meat or whatever. And so you're using it in a real world scenario to practice your language skills with a particular regional accent and that sort of thing. So that's really pretty cool. And of course, it can come up with any number of those on the fly, which would take forever if you had to do them.
I think that's a great idea. I have seen different role-playing type instances in helping students learn. So, all right, any final thoughts or comments as we wrap up? You get a break after this. Great. All right. Well, thank you very much.